Have you ever wished that you were somewhere else, doing something else, and felt like there was just really no way to get there? Let's talk about that. Welcome to the Press On podcast, where it's our goal to assist you as you press on in your walk with Christ. Maybe you, as many others were, about a month ago, made resolutions to change things because you didn't like where you were at, whether that be making a resolution to change something about your finances. I want to spend my money a little bit differently in 2024. Making a physical resolution to change something about your body. I want to lose some weight. I want to get faster whenever I run. Maybe some of you are making spiritual resolutions as well. I want to see some growth in my life, in my relationship with God. These are all fantastic things, but as we make those resolutions, we're oftentimes reminded of the ways that we've done that in the past, and we maybe saw those resolutions, those commitments dwindle over time, or maybe we made resolutions, but we just never really figured out, where do I get started? How do I begin this path? Or maybe we've made those same commitments so many times that we've got to the point where we don't even make commitments anymore. We just kind of sit and recognize this is just what I am and there's nothing I can ever do to change any of this. If you have that feeling today that I just don't know that I can ever be anywhere than where I am right now, there is no change that is happening in my life, I want to read a psalm together. It's a little bit of a longer psalm, but I encourage you to take a Bible out and follow along as we read Psalm 107. There's 43 verses. We're going to read through the whole thing. And as we do that, I want you to try to pick up on a phrase that is used a couple times in that psalm that I think can be instrumental in helping us as we seek to grow in our own lives. So I'm going to be reading from the Christian Standard Bible. It may sound a little bit different than some of the translations you read in the past, but I think that it does a great job of helping us to wrap our minds around some of the words and the language that is being used. So I hope you'll follow along as we read this together. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His faithful love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord proclaim that He has redeemed them from the power of the foe, and has gathered them from the lands, from the east and the west, from the north and the south. Some wandered in the desolate wilderness, finding no way to a city where they could live. They were hungry and thirsty. Their spirits failed within them. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He rescued them from their distress. He led them by the right path to go to a city where they could live. Let them give thanks to the Lord for His faithful love and His wondrous works for all humanity. For He has satisfied the thirsty and filled the hungry with good things. Verse 10, others sat in darkness and gloom, prisoners in cruel chains, because they rebelled against God's commands and despised the counsel of the Most High. He broke their spirits with hard labor. They stumbled and there was no one to help. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He saved them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and gloom and broke their chains apart. Let them give thanks to the Lord for His faithful love and His wondrous works for all humanity, for He has broken down the bronze gates and cut through the iron bars. Verse 17, fools suffered affliction because of their rebellious ways and their iniquities. They loathed all food and came near the gates of death. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He saved them from their distress. He sent His word and healed them. He rescued them from the pit. Let them give thanks to the Lord for His faithful love and His wondrous works for all humanity. Let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and announce His works with shouts of joy. Others went to sea in ships, conducting trade on the vast water. They saw the Lord's works, His wondrous works in the deep. He spoke and raised a stormy wind that stirred up the waves of the sea, rising up to the sky, sinking down to the depths, their courage melting away in anguish. They reeled and staggered like a drunkard, and all their skill was useless. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed. They rejoiced when the waves grew quiet, And then he guided them to the harbor they longed for. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his faithful love and his wondrous works for all humanity. Let them exalt him in the assembly of the people and praise him in the council of the elders. He turns rivers into desert, springs into thirsty ground, and fruitful land into salty wasteland because of the wickedness of its inhabitants. He turns a desert into a pool, dry land into springs, and causes the hungry to settle there. And they establish a city where they live. They sow fields and plant vineyards that yield a fruitful harvest. He blesses them, and they multiply greatly. He does not let their livestock decrease. When they are diminished and are humbled by cruel oppression and sorrow, he pours contempt on nobles and makes them wander in a trackless wasteland. But he lifts the needy out of their suffering and makes their families multiply like flocks. The upright see it and rejoice, and all injustice shuts its mouth. Let whoever is wise pay attention to these things and consider the Lord's acts of faithful love. What an awesome psalm. And I specifically want to draw our attention at the first and the very last verses of this psalm, where the psalmist says that we are to give thanks to the Lord for he is good and his faithful love endures forever. In fact, he calls our attention at the close to the wisdom of paying attention to that, to seeing God's love has great faith, that it can be counted on, it can be trusted in. And this really makes up the reason for the hope that the psalmist brings up again and again. Now, that hope may fill us, and it's available to everyone. No matter where you are and what you've done, God's faithful love is available. But that doesn't mean that life is without consequences. If you recall, verse 33 and 34, he talks about being able to turn fruitful fields into salty wastelands because of the actions of the wicked. And sometimes that's what happens in our lives. Because of our wickedness, we reap consequences of our actions, but also sometimes because of the wickedness of others, we experience difficulties and failures and frustrations. So I want to look at what the author says in between those. The points in which he draws our attention to our great need. And he did it 4 times. I hope you recognized it. I hope you heard the pattern. 4 times when he says that we have a need to cry out to the Lord in our trouble. And yes, I think this is talking about the Israelites and it's revealing a history of the Israelites. But in these 4 times, I think we can also see things that greatly apply to us in our lives today as we seek to grow and draw near to our Lord and to prosper in the lives that we live today. So the first one that I want us to consider is at the beginning of the passage, he talked about those who wandered and they seemed a bit lost. They knew that they were hungry and thirsty, but they didn't have the things that would fill them. And so often we feel like that in our lives. We are wandering around from one thing to the next that promises. The world is filled with promises that says, this is going to be what satisfies you. This is what you need to make your life feel more complete. Maybe that's part of what we've made our resolutions, try to attain those things. And yet we attain them and then we don't feel complete. And it leaves us just reeling, searching for the next thing that promises to fulfill that. And in those moments, the author says, cry out to the Lord. Because he's the one that's able to feed you. He's the one that's able to give you drink. He's the one that's able to satisfy your lives. And not only is he able to do that, he says, I will take you from wandering to living. I will be able to plant you in the city that you have longed for, where there we can have a life. And that's the exact thing that Jesus came. He said, I come to be a shepherd. Part of that idea of shepherding is to feed and care for the flock. But I came, John 10, I came to give life abundant. So whenever we feel like we're wandering and we're just a bit lost, the author says, call out, cry out to the Lord. He also tells us to cry out to the Lord whenever we are ensnared in prisons of captivity. And it's a very clear picture of sin. We have rebelled against God. We have rejected His counsel. And this is the most important time for us to cry out to the Lord. What's amazing is He doesn't answer that cry with, I reject you because of how wicked you have been. I don't want to have a relationship with you. I don't want to rescue you. Instead, it says He tears down the gates. He rips open the bars. He's able to destroy that which has held us captive. And it makes me think of a time in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 2, when Peter is speaking to the Jews who had crucified Jesus, and they were captive to anger and a lust for power, greed. They were jealous of what Jesus had that they desired so much for that they were willing to kill Him. And He speaks to these people and He brings up an Old Testament prophecy from Joel. And it sounds very similar to this when He says that all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. The rest of Acts, Luke records that, and he just goes on recording what did that look like over and over and over again. He says, I'm going to tell you what it looks like to call on the name of the Lord and find salvation. But that's what the psalmist is reminding us here. In our rebellion and in our captivity to sin, we have but need to cry out to the Lord, and His goodness and His faithfulness will always come to our aid. Sometimes we're in those positions because of our foolishness. He goes on to talk about those who refuse to eat, they refuse to eat even to the point of death. They're knocking at the grave, and He calls for them to call out or cry out to the Lord and be heard. And so many times in our lives, that's the foolish way that we think. I know that this is probably not a good thing for me. I know that this won't help me meet my goals. It won't help me have a better relationship with God. It won't help me to fix the health problems in my life, but I'm going to do it anyway. Much like a child who has been told, don't touch that, it's hot. We reach our hands out to see how close we can get. Sometimes to see if we can touch it really quickly and get away with it. And in our foolishness, we find ourselves so close to death's door, especially spiritually. And yet at that moment, when we cry out to the Lord, He says that not only can He change us, there's a transformation described from people who are at death's door to being taken away from the pit. They're no longer near death. They're crying out with joy and thanksgiving. He changes them. But as you read through the entirety of the psalm, no longer are we foolish, but the wise reflect on God's faithfulness to act. He is good, and His goodness is always near. So God is able to change those who cry out to Him in their foolishness into wisdom, in their near death to life. But sometimes it's not because of our foolishness. The last one that he brings up is this idea of these sailors. He describes those that have gone out to sea, and we think of the boldness as they go out into the great unknown, and they are in awe of the power and the wonders of God. And yet, as they see all that, they find themselves in the midst of storms, and their courage just waxes away. It's gone as they find the power and the might of the trial that becomes upon them. And how many times has that described you and me? Maybe we set out to make a goal for ourselves in being a better evangelist and telling others about the good news of Jesus. Opening our home more to show hospitality to others. Maybe we said, I'm going to save more. I want to be able to use that in ways that honor God, so I'm going to save more money this year. Or I want to take care of my body more because I want to be of greater service to the Lord. And then things happen along the way. I tried to tell somebody about Jesus and they laughed at me. They really started to make fun of me, and now I really don't have a good relationship with them anymore. Here it was, I thought I was coming out with boldness, and this storm has come upon me that really is sapping away my courage to want to do more of that in the future. I invited people over to my home and nobody came. Made me wonder if anybody even really cares about me or about coming to be near me. I wanted to make better choices. And then I got hurt. I didn't even do anything. I just got out of bed and my leg, all of a sudden, my knee was giving me fits. And it really messed up my efforts to try to get better and try to heal my body physically. In these moments where we had courage and now it feels like our goal, our drive has all been sapped from us. Sometimes even from storms that feel like it's not even anybody else's fault, we even question, God, are you doing this? What do we do? God says, cry out to me. Cry out to me because I can deliver you. Cry out to me because I can deliver you to the harbor of your purpose where you long to be, what you were driving at to begin with. I can get you there. Over and over again in this psalm, that is the advice of the psalmist. Whether we are feeling lost, or we have chosen to rebel against God, we have acted foolishly in our lives, or others and other circumstances have come upon us that have sapped our energy and our courage and our boldness. Over and over again, he says, cry out to the Lord. And I can't help but be drawn to one last passage in the New Testament, which we read about Peter, who is invited out onto the water to walk with Jesus. And what's amazing about that to me is it doesn't take into account the ways that Peter had failed Jesus in maybe arguing with others over who's the greatest in the kingdom, completely missing the magnitude, completely missing the magnitude of who was in their midst, the Son of God. And they're arguing over who's the greatest. It doesn't matter. Jesus invites him out and Peter walks on the water. But just as equal to that point is it doesn't matter that Peter gave everything away to follow after him. He sacrificed his business. He left all things and said, I will follow you wherever you go, Jesus. As he stood on that water, he took his eyes off of Christ and he saw the storm and he saw the winds and the waves and he began to sink. And this is what stands out to me in this story, is it doesn't matter his successes and it doesn't matter his failures. When he became overcome, he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus delivered him. We have that same confidence that the psalmist draws our attention to. We have a good and faithful God. It is wise to remember his faithful, loving kindness. It is important for us to cry out to him. So if you are beginning a new walk this year, you're going to try to grow, especially if you are beginning a walk with Christ, that I want to grow in my relationship with God through him. It is vital that we begin that by crying out to the Lord. If you or someone you know is in need of that, we would love to talk with you more. If it just is helpful to share this video, we encourage you to do that. Maybe you could leave a like and subscribe. That will help us to get this video into the hands of others who might come across our channel. But in whatever ways we can, we hope that we can assist you to press on in your walk with Christ. As always, we thank you and God bless.